Being called to an inquest for a death that has happened in one of your care services can be a stressful prospect for anyone. To help understand how every care provider should respond in this set of circumstances, I sat down with Anna Maria Lemmer, who's one of the senior associate solicitors at Ridouts. Among other important subjects, we talk about how care providers can prepare for an inquest, what happens during the process of an inquest, and what the possible outcomes of an inquest can be. I'm Simon Parker, and this is the Care Leaders Network podcast. So here goes. Inquests, what every care provider needs to know. So, Anna, what is the purpose of an inquest, and in what circumstances are they required?
So the purpose of an inquest, it's a coroner's investigation, and the coroner is looking at 4 questions. So that's who the deceased person was, when they died, where they died, and how they died. And the most important question really is how the person died and the circumstances surrounding their death. So that's the purpose of a coroner's investigation. In terms of circumstances where they arise in different circumstances. So they might arise if a person has had an unnatural death, or the cause is unknown, a violent death, or if a death occurred in state detention, so in prison, for example. But yes, it's about answering the 4 questions: who, where, when, and how the person died.
Sure, got you. And of course, I guess from a care provider set of circumstances, this is quite an important set of circumstances to deal with diligently because of the level of emotion and things that's involved in the circumstances, of course. So getting this type of stuff right, I'm guessing, is of absolute importance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's various impacts that can arise on the back of an inquest. So it is important to get it right at the outside. And so preparation is really key.
Sure. And I guess, like, that being the case then, so how does a care provider go about preparing for that inquest and I guess the ensuing process that would happen as a result of the inquest itself?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's different ways to go about it. So sometimes a coroner will contact a provider and ask them and say, we need a witness to talk about the circumstances surrounding the person's death. Other times they don't do that. And a way to go about it is to request interested person status. So this is when you apply to the coroner and request IP status. And what it does is it grants you access to information. So you become a party to the coronial proceedings and you can play an active role in it. If interested person status is granted, it means that you can have access to the evidence that's available, and that might include a post-mortem report, for example, which can help a provider's understanding in relation to what actually happened, and helps to understand what some of the issues are and maybe where the coroner is going in terms of their investigation. So interested person status is really helpful. If, on the other hand, and the two can be quite closely linked, the coroner might say, we need a witness statement from the nurse on shift at the time the incident occurred. So I can give you an example of a case I've recently worked on, and it was in relation to a choking incident, and a resident in a care home died as a result of choking. And the coroner wanted witness statements from different people who were on shift during the time of the incident. And what I did was I got involved at an early stage. So after the provider had already carried out some initial investigations in relation to the incident. But then what I did is I spoke to a number of staff members. So the nurse on shift, the care assistant, and also the registered manager. And I covered different areas with them in order to address, what it was the coroner wanted. So we looked at the staff member's professional background, and what their role involves day to day. We discuss the training they've had in relation to choking. And then we actually, talked about what happened during the incident and the action they took. And these are really key details to get out in a witness statement. And then we also explored whether any lessons had been learnt. And that's where a statement from a registered manager can be really helpful, because they're able to cover things at a sort of managerial level, and they talk about what was done on the ground, and how they addressed it with staff, and what lessons were learned, and how they went about it. The example in this case being all staff had refresher training in relation to choking. That can be really important, showing that remedial action has been taken after event, because it shows that the provider has taken it seriously, and it limits the risk of a coroner producing or issuing what's known as a prevention of future death report, which is something that they have a duty to issue if there are concerns that arise in an inquest. So providers want to try and reduce the risk of a coroner doing that. And if they show that remedial action has been taken, it's a really good way of going about it.
Sure. I mean, it's obviously an incredibly sad set of circumstances where somebody's died, obviously in a choking scenario. I guess the important thing is, as you say, from a provider perspective, it's really key to make sure that the lessons are learned, that scenario shouldn't play out in the future. I can imagine, of course, there's going to be implications for the family members, of course, of the deceased. I guess the conversation for today, of course, is focused on the inquest and the process and the kind of the practical side of things. But I guess it kind of makes sense to kind of pause for a moment just in that scenario. Obviously, the fact that it's extremely an emotive set of circumstances for everyone involved. So, if you could talk me through what actually happens during the course of an inquisition, I think that would be a really logical next point for us to unpack together.
Yeah. So during the course of an inquest, well, there's different stages to it. You have the lead up to the inquest, and that involves all the preparation. So that's getting witness statements together, evidence, and providing that to the coroner. Then you've got the actual hearing itself. So when a hearing takes place, a lot of the time it's done face to face, or it can be done virtually, but the same principles apply. And if it's a face to face inquest, it's less formal than a typical court setting. So criminal courts, for example, they're very different to a coroner's court, but it's not any less daunting for witnesses, and especially if they've never been called to an inquest before, it can be quite nerve-wracking for them. So I think to help with that and to alleviate concerns, the key thing really is preparation. And I think if you have lawyers involved who have taken you through the process of taking a witness statement from you, supporting you with evidence, and just talking you through what's going to happen, I think that can really help a witness to feel assured and know what to expect during the actual hearing itself. So what will happen practically is a witness will be called to swear an oath or take an affirmation, and then they'll start. The coroner will ask them questions. Interested persons, they will then have the opportunity to ask questions. So, for example, the deceased family members, and a jury would then have the opportunity to ask questions if a jury was engaged. What I always say to witnesses is it's very helpful to have a hard copy of their statement in front of them. It helps them to know what they've said. Like as I've just mentioned, they can be very nervous when giving evidence, but if they've got a hard copy of their statement in front of them, they've got that to refer to. They can refresh their memory. It's not a memory test, and this is all about assisting the coroner with their investigation. So that's sort of what happens on the day. The coroner will then go away and consider their conclusion, and then they'll issue their conclusion. So that's the sort of process during an inquest hearing.
Okay, thanks for explaining that last point. So talk me through the length of an inquest, usually from the point of when the incident happens all the way through to the conclusion. How long would that process typically take?
Yeah, I mean, typically it's 12 months from when the incident happens to when the actual inquest hearing takes place. However, there was a significant delay with COVID. So a lot of cases I'm working on at the moment, it's going way beyond this 12-month period. Also, there's different variations to that. I mean, sometimes it can happen a lot sooner. Coroners have different workloads, so it's kind of hard to give you an exact answer to that because it really does vary. So yeah, it depends basically.
Sure, but 12 months would be
I'd say on average. I think talk in terms of averages, yeah.
Because it's quite, I guess that presents lots of opportunity for preparation, but then also probably quite a lot of time for nervousness as well. You kind of hope that the people that are involved in the process haven't got too much experience in that world, because of course there's a reason why there's an inquest happening. And I guess for the non-legal team, of course, the legal team kind of, this is the day-to-day, a lot of the day-to-day focus of what they're doing. For the people that aren't maybe so experienced in this, I can imagine that having that support from a legal team who have got the experience, who can map out the process, help manage expectations around kind of all of the various different elements. It's that the reassurance around how it's likely to play out and things that's going to be super important. So, within that process, the coroner, of course, is going to start drawing some conclusions around the set of circumstances, etc. What are the possible conclusions that the coroner can draw in that set of circumstances?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned at the beginning, obviously the coroner is asking the 4 questions: the who, when, where, and how the person died. There's different types of conclusions. So you can have a short form conclusion, and that short form conclusion could be accident, misadventure, unlawful killing, suicide. There's also narrative conclusions, and that's a description about how the person came to their death. So they're the different kinds of conclusions. Information often arises during an inquest, which means that, for example, an interested person might want to pursue some kind of civil liability, a civil claim in relation to the deceased person's death. And so they might use some of the evidence that has come out during the hearing to support a potential claim. So whilst there's no civil or criminal liability attached, it can lead on to other action being taken. In terms of a negative conclusion, sometimes there might be what's known as a neglect rider, and wording might in this neglect rider, the wording might include a gross failure to provide basic care. The deceased condition was known or ought to have been known, and certain action was required to be taken. So they're the kind of things that you want to avoid. But that's why, preparation is so key, and making sure that the right evidence and is elicited and put before the coroner so that they can investigate fully, and helping the coroner with that process.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So obviously these are really, really important circumstances. Of course, they need to be dealt with correctly. And I guess because of these types of scenarios, there's going to be an impact of the inquest on the provider itself. Can you talk me through some of those potential impacts, the different things that might kind of play out as a result of an inquest happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So the potential impact is very wide. If we talk about prevention of future death reports, first of all, they're known as they're Regulation 28 PFD reports, and the coroner has a duty to issue them. So that's if they've got concerns arising from things that have come up during the course of an inquest. And what it does is it highlights in a very public way potential issues with a provider. So things that a provider wouldn't necessarily want the public to know. It's a public report. The provider has to respond within 56 days. And you know, that's the kind of thing you want to avoid. And a way to avoid that is to show that lessons have been learnt and remedial action has been taken. I mean, that's one of the ways of trying to reduce the risk. On the back of PFD reports, you can get adverse regulatory attention. So in the form of CQC, they might come in and carry out an inspection on the back of it. If it's a provider who has a group of homes or a number of homes, you know, CQC might go in and inspect all the other services just to see if there's a pattern and any trends emerging. So, you know, there are two possible outcomes. A local authority safeguarding team could also take some interest in it. And then, of course, you've got media attention. So if there's, you know, any kind of adverse story about the care sector, that the media often do quite like to jump on it. So there is that risk there. And you know, we often say to providers that it's helpful to have some support from a PR person, have a press statement prepared in advance, just so that it's ready to go once the coroner you know, has concluded the inquest. So they're the kind of things that could arise in terms of the impact following an inquest.
Got you. Okay, perfect. So there are a few different considerations that should be met, I guess, that should be recognised towards the end of the inquest process. And I guess it wouldn't be too much of a surprise if there were local authority inspections or CQC inspections off the back of that. They're going to be doing their job. They're going to be making sure that the standards are being upheld within the services. And of course, to your point, they've really got to scratch under the surface and make sure that there aren't trends, and also that those lessons have been learned. You'd like to think that a good quality provider, if the worst came to the worst and there was an inquest around something that had happened and there were mistakes that had been made. Nobody wants to be in that set of circumstances. Of course, there are the accidents, of course, unfortunately can happen, but there's an awful lot that can be put into place to make sure that these things aren't I guess kind of the unfortunate reality that they are unfortunately occasionally. So it's building in the systems and processes, making sure that the kind of underpinning culture of the organization is very much one of an open learning culture where people can admit where maybe there have been faults, but they're willing and open to be able to take action against that and make sure that the risks are mitigated in the future. So really helpful. Thank you so much for breaking that down for me. Of course, if people are interested in asking more questions, they can reach you directly through the website, etc. But it's been good to be able to connect. Thank you so much for your time today, and I appreciate it.
Thanks, Simon. It's been great. Thank you.